Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another series of Meyer on the Move, Meyer in Studio, real estate discussions with Levi Meyer at Compass Real Estate. Today, I am joined by my colleague, Josh Kaufman, who will be co-hosting today, and Vicki Lopez, who is the Florida State Representative for District 113. Welcome, Vicki.
Thank you so much. Vicki. I'm very excited to be here today.
Vicki and I have known each other now for a couple of years. We constantly run in some of the same circles. She's a pleasure, and we asked her to join us today because we want to talk about what she's working on, and primarily we're going to, this is a real estate show, so we're going to primarily focus on some of the real estate based topics. But just to bring you guys in, I want to introduce Josh Kaufman, who's a first-time guest and co-host.
Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for having me.
Josh Kaufman has a focus in commercial real estate transactions. Josh, tell us a little bit about your focus in real estate and your expertise.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me here today. I focus in commercial real estate. I come from a long line of construction and development professionals in my family, dating back about 4 generations, almost 90 years. From a real estate perspective, I tend to focus on land sales, development sales, and repositioning of commercial assets. I'm very active in the building industry. I had the pleasure of going up and visiting Vicki in January, I believe, when we were tackling some of the housing crisis issues, which was fun. It was my first time at the state capitol. And I serve on the with the Builders Association on the board of directors, the legislative committee, and I'm the co-chair of the Next Gen Council.
Wow.
Josh is a busy guy.
Very.
But yeah, Josh and I have been working together for 10 years in the real estate industry. Typically when there's something that requires a little bit of land development, there's a little bit more of a complex commercial deal, Josh and I will tend to team up. And Josh does a lot of work throughout the state. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be in Miami-Dade County or even the Tri-County area. Sometimes he's working on agricultural deals in and around Orlando or Tampa, and he's a pleasure to work with. So thank you for joining us today. Josh also had as one of the few people that I know that has read the Condo Legislation bill cover to cover more than once. I think he enjoys reading it.
That's 154 pages.
The only other person that I know that's read it back to back to cover is Vicki. And so we have the 2 people that I know that have read the Condo Legislation bill, and we really want to kind of shine a little light on what is happening in the condo world. Vicki, tell us a little bit about you and your sort of your journey into state representation, state legislation.
So thank you again, both of you, for having me on. This is probably a topic when we talk about housing, I get very excited. Although I must tell you that when I was elected in November of 2022, I had no idea that I would somehow surface as the housing expert of the Florida House. But that has happened. And like everything that I do, I take it very seriously, and I have become, I use expert as very loosely, obviously, because every day I learn something new about the housing industry, the housing market, and what is happening on the ground, right? And so this was a project of love, I like to say, because the speaker designate, who will be our speaker now, Danny Perez from Miami, I can still remember the day he walked over to me. I was on the House floor at my desk, and he said, "You're going to run the condo bill." And I said, "I am?" And I, first of all, had no idea I live in a condominium. I don't own it. I rent it. So, I have some experience in condos, but nothing. And he said, and all of us obviously knew what had happened in Surfside. That terrible tragedy that night was, I remember waking up to the news that 98 people had perished in a condominium building that had collapsed. And honestly, that went on for the news about that went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, right? And it was kind of an international situation. And so the legislature, I think, at some juncture, had always seen condominiums as sort of stepchildren of the housing market. And, when they talk about housing, they talked about single family homes and townhomes. Never did they ever talk about the, almost 3 million people that live in vertical living, right? When that building collapses, all lights, all attention went on to condominiums. And I think the legislature said to themselves, look, we can't have another building ever collapse. And so very quickly in that 2022 session, which was before I got elected, there was a special session. They passed a very quick bill that said we're going to focus on building safety and reserves. Well, nobody even knew what it meant, to be honest with you. So here comes Vicki in the Florida House, and I'm told to carry what was a pretty significant piece of legislation as a freshman, Senate Bill 154, which focused on bringing more clarity and transparency to that original bill. So that's how I got involved. And honestly, it's interesting because now I can tell you I have 667 condo associations just in District 113. So my world is about condominiums. And the other piece of legislation, obviously, that hopefully we'll talk about is the affordable housing crisis. So
yeah, and so we know that you're involved in several key legislative issues. We wanted to spend some time talking about some of those that you're passionate on. We know that you tend to foster a bipartisan collaboration where you try to cross the lines on some of those. And we know you've been active in the Jewish community and other religious communities, and making sure that the constituents of District 113 are seeing all of their needs met. Again, for today's focus, because we are somewhat limited on time, we are going to definitely hone in on the condo legislation and the affordable housing crisis, because you have emerged as the expert in those real estate matters.
I'll tell you that I have earned the title, the Condo Queen, which, honestly, that in and of itself was shocking. But yeah, I mean, I think people see me now as the person on the ground that really does understand and know what's going on in condos, not only in building safety and in financial reserves, but also in condo governance, which has been a huge problem. So,
yeah, and we've had some condo governance issues in Miami where HOAs have been misleading some of the condo owners in many ways. There's been a lot of fraud. There's been these are areas I think that it's important that we hone in and tackle on, and that we legislate them to make sure that everybody's acting in a professional manner. So can you give us a little bit of high level, when we talk about the condo legislation? I think it's SB 40,
so that was
and
the original
SB was the original. Now it's SB 32B?
No, so here's how it works. The original was SB, what's known as Senate Bill 4D. That happened in a special session, right? Then in 2023, we passed Senate Bill 154, and that was solely focused on building safety and reserves. And then this year we had House Bill 1021 that focused on, believe it or not, governance, the property management side of all of that, because remember, there's stakeholders in all of these discussions, and one of them obviously is a property manager. And it also included some legislation regarding hotel condos, which is becoming very a kind of a new and upcoming housing market, where condominiums are being built side by side with under the flagship of a hotel.
Yeah. We're seeing those, especially in areas of downtown and Wynwood, which both fall within your district. Especially, again, even recently, my emails are flooded with the pre-sale marketing of some of these hotel condo buildings, and it's, again, I think it's not brand new, but it's an emerging market within South Florida that we're seeing more common.
But let's just talk about that for a second, because I want to tell everyone, buyer beware. On hotel condos. There has been a lot of angst about condo owners who have gotten into the condo hotel situation where they did not read the declaration documents. And for everyone listening, if you're in real estate, you know that a condominium is a corporation and it has declaration documents, much like articles of incorporation. It spells out every single thing about the condominium when it was created. Oftentimes in a hotel condo situation, the hotel is really the person that has all the organization that has all the power. It literally has to maintain the expenses as they would, let's look at the Four Seasons or the Ritz, right? They have a certain level of, I would say, they have to look like the Ritz. They have to look like the Four Seasons. It's expensive, right? Because they might be using higher level materials, more costly materials. And the condo owners found out when it was too late that they were in fact at the mercy of whatever the hotel wants to spend, and they have to pick up their portion. Many condo owners did not know that. They did not know that there are what's known as shared elements in that situation. And so House Bill 1021 made it mandatory that they disclose that information before someone buys a condo. I am a huge proponent of full transparency in any real estate transaction. And now a condo owner, a prospective condo owner in a hotel condo, has to be able to get their declaration documents so that they know what is the responsibility of the hotel and what's the responsibility of the condo owner, and how does that govern that governance example really impact them? Because I just had someone that was going to buy in the Shore Club. He read the declaration documents, wrote me and said, I don't know how anybody would buy in a hotel condo.
Because it seems like he has no say.
He has no say. That's exactly right.
I first learned about the condo hotels looking and reviewing at some of the construction defect litigation that's governed by statute 558.
Right.
And that was my first exposure to the hotel condo and the way that the documents are written with the common shared elements and who has responsibility, because when the lawsuits for the construction defects were taking place, that's where everybody was fighting over the dollars and who became responsible to repair and who ended up receiving the funds. So it's been a very polarizing topic, to say the least, of condo hotels. And thank you for helping to draft some legislation to be able to bring clarity to this issue.
Sure, and more on the way, I think, because there's more clarity that needs to be made now.
Well, and I think that's important, especially for our viewers who are interested in real estate purchases and real estate investment, to know that buyer beware on the hotel condo situation, and really understand the articles of incorporation or the bylaws in this case that govern them. So checkbox for a moment. We're going to put a pin in condo hotel. I do want to jump back in to the condo legislation, and we'll talk a little bit about affordable housing crisis as well. High level on the condo legislation, how did it start? What are we looking at? We know that it goes back more recently to the Champlain Tower collapse in Surfside. Prior to that, I think in the 1970s, Josh was telling us.
Yeah, in 1974, there was an office building in Miami that collapsed, and an unfortunate event. Some people had perished, and fast forward a few years, the local counties ended up, Miami-Dade County specifically, ended up coming in and drafting legislation, which came to be known as the 40-year recertification. And then that's what Miami-Dade governed. Broward County ended up drafting a similar legislation, Palm Beach, and then there was a few other select counties in Florida that I believe drafted their own version of the 40-year recertification. Fast forward a couple years ago to the tragic events over at Surfside, and I think that's when the state kind of came in. Which I
want to hone in on for a second. Is the tragic events that we saw in Surfside, touched the lives of everybody in South Florida and beyond. It was a globally recognized issue. Every news channel that you turn to, whether in the United States or outside, was talking about this tragic collapse. I know a half a dozen people who have lost family members in that collapse, and for months we saw, during the cleanup, you could drive across the MacArthur Causeway and see trucks, just hauling out in rows of 5, 10, 15 trucks, hauling out the debris, the remains, and it was a tragic time. And so it's a very serious thing when a condo collapses, and I think it's something that we have to put our foot in the ground and say never again. And that I think is where we now go back to revisit the 40-year certification, but more than just the 40-year recertification, right? So this bill is going to cover a lot more. So can you give us, Vicki, a little high level on what this is, what we're looking at?
So as I've been told by both Broward and Miami-Dade County, they've been recertifying all buildings, meaning office buildings, apartment buildings, and condominium buildings since 1997. What they never did was worry about whether there'd be money to make the repairs those recertifications actually, mandate. So it was interesting. These are what are known in the condo world as special assessments. So when a building gets recertified, they will say, okay, the building, most often they will say a building is structurally sound, so everyone can remain in the building, but, and there's the one, as I say, the one word that changes the equation, but you must make the following repairs. Now, for buildings that have never made repairs, that price tag can be huge. For those that have been doing their repairs and maintenance over the years, it may be $1 million, $2 million that has to be spent, right? Not 34 million or 100 million, right? So that was, those two counties were at least ensuring building safety. We have 67 counties in Florida. 65 other counties were not recertifying buildings. So what does Senate Bill 140 and Senate Bill 154 do? It mandates a milestone inspection. That's what the state calls it. The milestone inspection has to be done at 30 years. So any building that's 30 years old will undergo a milestone inspection across Florida. That law became in effect, obviously, on July 1st of 2022. It's been in effect now for 2 years. What we need to know is how many of those buildings have been considered structurally sound or unsound. I can tell you that in Jensen Beach 2 weeks ago, 2 buildings out of 3 had to be evacuated immediately. They were unstructurally sound. And another building, another condominium complex in Broward had to be evacuated immediately. So if this is, and I'm hopeful that this is the exception and not the rule, but the fear is that some of these buildings are in pretty bad shape and people are living in them. And so the question is, you know, the milestone inspection is probably the most important thing that we will do vis-a-vis building safety, right? So what people are facing today is what's known as the special assessment. And that means it wasn't budgeted for, right? It's not an expense you could have put in your operating budget. It's something that's coming, you know, and they give you like a 2-year notice. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming, and then it comes, right? And that coupled with the increase in property insurance is creating a pretty financial, situation here, dire financial situation for many condos. The next thing that the state decided was, okay, well, now that we know that your building is safe, you're going to have this milestone inspection, we need to make sure you have the money in order to make those repairs at that 30 year and every 10 years thereafter. Here's the situation we learned from Champlain Towers. Champlain Towers, unfortunately, did not make repairs. It did not have reserves. And what ended up happening was by the time it collapsed at like 38 and a half years, it needed $16 million to make those repairs. Now, what did we learn from Champlain Towers was that obviously 40 years was too much. Had they been at 30 years, had they been recertifying buildings at 30 years, they would have found all the issues at Champlain Towers and 98 people would still be alive today.
And 10 years is a really long time. It makes a big difference.
It makes
you
a
can
big
be surprised
difference.
what can happen to a building in 10 years.
Sitting on the ocean, exposed to the salt waters and the elements.
I'm learning a lot about that whole saltwater intrusion type of impact on concrete, because everywhere you look, if you're seeing repairs on a building, on a condominium building, you're seeing concrete restoration work. So I met with concrete restoration people to say, what's happening here? Why? Well, because saltwater intrusion is real. And that means that concrete doesn't last as long. So you're right. 30 years.
And more specifically, it's less the concrete, but more the rebar inside the concrete,
that
right?
too.
Which tends to get salt in it, and then they rust, they expand, and that causes cracking inside the inside the concrete, which causes structural issues.
And for a lot of the people that are listening, when a building is built, and here in South Florida, we end up building a building with concrete, has stucco on it, which is a waterproofing agent. And then there's a further waterproofing agent, which is the paint. And paint has a certain life expectancy. And when you're exposed to the elements and on an ocean front, the life expectancy of the paint is going to be substantially less. So continual maintenance and repair and repainting is something that's a big issue. And I think a lot of buildings over the years just lack the repairs or the funds to be able to do those things. So I think this legislation is really important because it hones in on what the responsibility is of the members of the association, on the property managers, in order to continue the maintenance of the association and continue operations.
And that's a great segue to the second part of the legislation, which was the reserves. So now every single residential, and so remember that when I told you that Miami-Dade and Broward are recertifying all buildings, the legislature is not interested in office buildings, right? What we consider commercial buildings. This is solely residential condominium buildings. But what we've said is any condominium 3 stories or higher must have what's known as a structural integrity reserve study by the end of this year, by December 31st, 2024. Now, what does that everyone always asks me, what does that study do? What does it say? It's supposed to be a prospective tool for the condominium board, right? What will we need when the 8 structural components, because what we've done is we've identified in statute what those 8 structural components are, right? You have to reserve for each one of those. Now, You ask, how does that operate? Well, you can either get a licensed engineer, licensed architect, or what's known as reserve analyst or a certified reserve specialist, right? So basically they come in, they do a visual inspection of the building, and then they take all 8 of those and they say, this is the useful life and this is the estimated cost. So I like to use the roof as a perfect example. The roof is obviously one of those structural integrity components. If the roof has a 10-year useful life, and it's estimated that you will need $1 million to repair or replace that roof at the end of 10 years, come January 1st of 2025, any budget that is approved by any condo board must include those reserves for that roof, and that would be $100,000.
For the items that are on that milestone inspection report.
They cannot be waived. The funds cannot be commingled with anything.
Which currently they can, right?
Yes.
The current previous legislation would say you need reserves, but you can waive them.
Yeah.
And that's now we're saying not anymore.
That's how we are where we are today, because they were allowed to waive reserves. Now, who's going to increase the cost of the monthly maintenance fee if you don't have to legally by law, right? So for many, many associations, they kept kicking the can down the road, and they kept saying, well, maybe I won't be here when it needs to be repaired. And many condominium associations, the monthly maintenance fee was between $500 and $700 a month, right? Everyone thought that's going to be sufficient to ensure that my building is structurally safe for the rest of its useful life, right? It is not. And I think what we're learning from these reserve studies, and obviously from the milestone inspections, is it's expensive to live in a condominium. And I think the very narrative around condominiums were good for retirees and for young families to get started in the housing market may very well not be the case moving forward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people always tell me that it's more convenient to live in a condo because the HOA manages everything. They're supposedly taking care of maintenance. Everybody shares the responsibility of those costs. And then you never have to think about mowing the lawn, painting the building, doing all that stuff. In theory, should be managed by, and then, some people say though that fee, gets really expensive. And I think, again, we haven't even seen what the real expensive is in many of these buildings. Because when people move to Miami, they ask, what can I be paying? What can I estimate to pay in HOA fees in Miami? And I tell them probably on the low end, it's probably 85 cents a foot, 85 cents a foot. And for the most part, buildings are probably closer to about $1.25. As an example, the Ritz-Carlton residences on Meridian in Miami Beach, I think is just now increasing to $1.90. And that's for a Ritz-Carlton, so there is an elevated level of amenity. But again, if we're under assessed or under reserved at these $85 rates, like where do they go to, and is condo living going to continue to be affordable to people?
Well, I mean, there's so many things that are going on now in the condo, sort of like this new, what we're calling now the condo crisis that's on the horizon. I really honestly believe there are several things going on. In addition to the fact that, one, we don't know what the crisis looks like yet. If the SIRS, that's what we call the Structural Integrity Reserve Study, is known as the SIRS. If the SIRS isn't due, if you will, until the end of the year, I have no idea whether the big crisis that everyone's talking about is actually just in South Florida or is it in other parts of the state. I mean, and I don't know how much it's going to cost everyone, right? I mean, what's the range? We've heard some crazy ranges, right? We've heard the Cricket Club was at $134,000 per unit. So, I mean, there's a lot that we don't know yet. I mean, if you know me, you know that I need to collect the data first before I can even determine or create a solution to this, what could be a very big housing problem in Florida. But it all sort of runs into, people are trying to sell their units now. If you're reading real estate reports, you know that it has been an incredible increase on condos on the market right now. Everyone needs to understand that 75% of the condos in South Florida are 30 plus years old. That's a lot of old buildings, right?
And we have a lot of new inventory on the horizon.
You do, but it's on the horizon. And here's the problem that we have. A lot of that new inventory is luxury condominiums. And so I've got people that are on fixed incomes or who only make so much money who are now sitting in a condo building that is unaffordable for them, right? So they're trying to sell them. And, I read a report about an owner in the cricket club who was trying to get out, and he listed his property for like I think $474,000. And every time a prospective buyer came in to ask the question, well, what's the reserves? And they heard the big number, they walked away from the deal. Well, now I can tell you, he finally sold it for $174,000, which is like a fire sale, and we don't want that, because then where do you go from there? But that's a question also around, what are the options? Well, you can sell the building to a developer. The condo board can, in fact, do what's known as a condo termination under Section 718 of the Condominium Act. So they can solicit proposals from developers, which is happening a great deal. I just read about one.
For people that want to sell and want to get out, but there's a great deal of people that don't want to move. They've been here a very long time. And I think they're feeling the pressure. But again, how do you make sure those people are safe while not,
that's what I call the delicate balance, because I have a responsibility to ensure that no other building collapses and no life is lost. But I also am sensitive to the fact that there are many, many people that aren't going to be able to afford these assessments, whether they're a special assessment or the structural integrity reserves. I mean, it is now, it's like we're having to pay the piper all at once.
And even the condo terminations are a tough subject right now. There was the Biscayne 21 and the Two Roads appellate court decision that overturned what the circuit court had decided and how to terminate that condominium. And I think that's creating even more challenges for developers to be able to come in and acquire the units. And developers I speak to today want to have 100% buy-in, not the 95%. And they want to see at the closing table the condominium termination take place then and there. So that way they don't end up with spending tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on these projects and end up with property that they can't develop and can contribute back units into the marketplace.
I think that's a case that I have been watching and I have been writing about. I've done op-ed pieces because it also speaks to property rights. Like, does one person in one condominium building have the right to hold back everyone else who's trying to get out? And often, listen, they've been offered 1.5. Twice what the market rate is. I mean, if you were to try to sell your unit on your own, you may not get what a developer will give you because he's not buying the building, he's buying the land. And I agree with you. Biscayne 21 is the case to watch. Because of several things, right? And I am committed, if the Third District Court of Appeals does not rehear the case, which is what the developer has asked them to do so, I will try to make the statute a more clear, because it's ambiguous. At least that's what Two Roads Development Company told me. It was ambiguous, and honestly, it should be very easy. I want it to be an easier process for those who want to get out, and not one of these where the developer is held up. Right now, it's a shell. This particular project that we're talking about, Biscayne 21, is in my district. If you were to go by Edgewater, which is becoming really an up-and-coming condominium area with beautiful new buildings, this piece of property was the most valuable piece of property. It had on two sides unobstructed views of the bay. Today, only a shell of that old building, it was 60 years old, sits there, while the developer can't do anything with it because there's been a stop by the third DCA. So whether the developer will go to the Supreme Court, the Florida Supreme Court, to get this, decided, or whether I will have to make it easier moving forward for developers, because that's got to be an option. Some of these buildings that are 60 and 70 years old probably need to be, raised and new buildings go up. The problem with all of that is that it speaks to the affordable housing crisis. It's all interrelated.
Of course, it all connects. It's a big web. And I want to ask you on the milestone deadline for the end of this year, right? Is it December?
It's not a milestone deadline, so everyone's confused. The
inspections have to be completed by the end of the year.
That's different than a milestone inspection. You got to understand, a milestone inspection is something that really digs deep into your building and then produces a report that says these are all the repairs. The SIRS that's due at the end of the year is just simply a reserve study, and it says this is what you have to start reserving for. So by the end of that useful life of each component, you have the money to repair or replace it. So it's very different, and people are confusing the milestone inspection, which is due at 30 years, versus the SIRS, which everyone has to do.
SIRS got to be done For all buildings.
For all buildings, all condominium buildings, three stories and higher.
And higher.
Both office and residential.
Not office.
Not office, just residential.
Just residential.
And just condominiums, not
So not
apartment
even
buildings.
multifamily, correct? Not even multifamily, just condominium.
Correct.
And is it possible for all these buildings to complete that to provide that Serice study by the end of the year? What drawbacks would they?
No, it would have been possible if they had started 2 years ago when the law went into effect. It would have been. But what ended up happening was, I think there was confusion about the law. Then when we clarified the law in 2023, I think people didn't know. I mean, I read a report from a condo board member who said, I didn't even know we were supposed to do this. So that speaks to having a professional property manager on site, which obviously they know what you needed to do, and also having a competent condo attorney represent you. They know what you needed to do. So if you've waited till now to try to get one of the 4 people that can do these SIRs, if you've waited till August, chances are you're not going to meet the deadline, because I'm already hearing that those who are going out to ask for a quote are being told that they can't, the professionals can't get to them until April, May of next year. So I'm telling everyone, look, you have a fiduciary responsibility as a condo board member to have complied with the law. If you can't get it done by the end of the year, then my suggestion is you get under contract, because at least you will have said, look, I tried and they just can't get to me. Because if you don't, the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, which regulates all condominiums in Florida, could in fact sanction you.
And so that was actually going to be my next question: is what happens if they can't? And for the moment, does the legislation make it clear what happens to those condo associations that aren't able to or don't abide by the law?
It doesn't make it clear. It doesn't make it clear. It doesn't specifically say if you don't get it done by this date, then this happens.
Correct.
What is in Section 718 and has been for probably since the beginning of time is that the department has the ability to sanction you $500 a day. I mean, for not complying with any part of the Condominium Act. So again, a good condo attorney would tell you, look, we need to get this done because this is in Section 718, and it doesn't say that they will. It just, that they could, and just that alone should have put everyone on notice.
What obligation does the local building officials have to make sure that these buildings are inspected, and what enforcement or actions do they have, or do they legally have as licensed building inspectors to say you're not in compliance? I mean, the law was passed because we have a building safety issue, and so if you're not inspected, is your building not safe?
So vis-a-vis the SIRs, they don't get involved at all, right? Like that's not our local building department's problem, whether they do the reserves or not. What is that they are already making sure that you're having your building inspected. And if you don't do what they ask you to do, they send you to the unsafe structures commission, I guess is what they call it, or a committee. And there you can be fined heavily, and they can, if they see that you're not doing it, they will mark that building unsafe and everyone has to move out. They'll either cut off the electricity, cut off the water. I mean, there are some serious consequences to not complying with the recertification, which is the part that actually confirms the building's safety. The SIRS is just on the part of the Department of Business and Professional Regulation to collect the data. They know how many condominiums we have in Florida and they know where they are. So they'll just ask, have you completed your SIRS, and how much was the assessment for your SIRS? That's what we've asked them to collect. Now, which
is like the first wave of data collection.
Yeah, it's the first wave of data collection. And I'm also collecting data on the milestone inspections. I want to know who's done them. Like, how many have been done? Who did them? Was it a licensed architect or a licensed engineer? So I can see how many we may be using, right? I mean, I don't know how many buildings have undergone the 30-year milestone inspection.
Is this data publicly available? Where can people go and see where this data is if they want to track it themselves?
Sure. The website of the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, they have what's known as a condominium division, and they can go there. And right now, because there's been so many changes to the law in the last 2 years, they are updating their website rapidly so that everyone will be able to go and just find what they need, information that they need.
Yeah, because I think that's another major issue for people that are looking to buy condos. And they want to understand what is the status of this building? Did they go through their SIRS? Did they go through their milestone? Have they done their engineering study? Are they expecting assessments? And that information is kept pretty private for the most part now, it seems, or more difficult to acquire.
Well, so Senate Bill 154 requires a prospective buyer to receive a copy of not only the milestone inspection, but of the SIRS as well. They have 15 days to review it, and if they don't like what they see, they can actually get out of a real estate deal. That's part of the law now. What I think is interesting is that I can only make sure that you get the information. If the prospective buyer doesn't review it, or if the realtor doesn't review it with them, then there's nothing I can do to help them, right? But I mean, the fact that I'm ensuring that they get it is important. Here's one of the things that I think we're not talking about, which is the banks and the mortgage brokers. Banks are telling me we will not give a mortgage to anyone who is trying to buy in a building that doesn't have reserves. Why should we take the risk?
Yeah, well, that's actually that was right. My next question is banks, mortgage, and insurance for noncompliance.
Yeah, one of the things we've heard talking to different insurance companies is they may not cover these buildings anymore, even come January 1st. If you're trying to go out and get your building certified and you're not certified, you haven't completed your milestone inspection, there's a big question if these buildings are just going to pull back their coverage or start creating a laundry list of exemptions within the coverage. Do you have any info on that?
Well, absolutely. Why do we believe that now Citizens is the biggest insurer of condominium buildings? I mean, it's very interesting to see what is happening in the insurance market. So if you know that 75% of the condominiums in South Florida are 30 plus years old, and many of them 40, 50, and 60. And you know that they weren't, the very older ones were not built to code. So they're not, I mean, as insurance companies, they tried to calculate risk. And for them, a very old building that doesn't have hurricane-proof windows, that doesn't have, reconstructed roofs, they're not, I mean, that's the biggest risk, right? The roofs, the exterior doors and windows when you're talking about condominium buildings. So if they haven't made any of those improvements, chances are they can't get insurance on the private market. So they have to turn to Citizens, which is the last resort, right? The state's insurance company. So right now, Citizens has the biggest bulk of all condominium buildings on their portfolio. And that's because people are not understanding that if you hadn't been making the repairs, if now your milestone inspection reflects serious, repairs need to be made, the insurance company says that's a risk I'm not willing to take, at least in the private market. Citizens doesn't have the right to turn them away. But again, that means the coverage, you're paying a lot of money for less coverage than you would on the private market side. So it's all interrelated. I tell everyone this is like a perfect storm. The insurance, the banking, the housing, and then the condominium. Because here's what I'm always asking people. Let's assume everyone sells their condominium in Florida, right? And let's assume that developers start to take some of these old buildings and build nice new buildings. Here's what they're building, luxury buildings, right? That's not the crisis that I have. Every time they build a luxury building, they have it sold within, minutes. That is not the issue, which is why we passed the Live Local Act, right? To try to incentivize developers to build workforce housing. Because if you live in a condominium now and you're within 80 to 120% AMI and you need to get out, where are you going to go? And that's what I say about everybody. Where's my retirees going to go? I don't have enough affordable housing stock in Florida to actually meet the demands.
Well, we don't even have enough housing for teachers and firefighters and police officers. And you're seeing in Homestead, homes are being built on, single family homes for $750,000 and $800,000. And that's crazy. Just not feasible anymore at today's interest rates and insurance costs for, 120% AMI is in the $90,000+ a year. And that's not enough to substantiate a $700,000 and $800,000 a month mortgage, whether it's in a condo or a single family home. So we definitely do have this affordable housing crisis that we need to figure out how to fix the missing middle.
Well, and it's not just the missing middle, because truly the AMI, the 80 to 120% AMI, in other parts of the state, that sounds like the teacher and that sounds like the firefighter. In Miami, it's not. It's absolutely not. They don't make that money. So then I say to myself, and I've been working with housing experts, the real crisis is between 60 and 80. That's where the most people are sitting. And that would be, somewhere between, say, 45,000 and 65,000, right? They can't afford to live in Miami anymore. And quite frankly, now it's impacting the job market. We're losing our local talent. They can't afford to live here unless they're going to live with their parents if they're lucky enough to have parents. But if you're graduating from a college in Florida, it's going to be hard to find your own place. So you're going to either need lots of roommates, or you need to live at home, or you're leaving Florida. And that'll impact the economy. Because if we don't have a workforce, and we don't have workforce housing, then what do we have? And the other part, I happen to represent the urban core of Miami, right? The most beautiful part of the city. And as I see it in my background here, I get very excited. With what I'm seeing, of course.
They need to update it. We got new buildings here.
We do. We have new buildings. However, the point is that I had a lot of people move from LA, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey. They came during the pandemic and they wanted to live in urban areas like the ones they were leaving, right? They've come and they exasperated the housing market, right? And I can tell you, I was paying for an 800 square foot condominium before the pandemic, $1,950. Yeah. Today I pay $3,150. Now,
and that's still still pretty reasonable, considering the market.
And yet, who can afford that kind of increase? Who can afford to live in a condominium anymore? And that's driving the cost up. So you see,
in the $60,000 category, that's more than 50% of your income.
No, right. There's a lot of people that are overburdened. They're rent burdened as well. And remember that all of these assessments that we're talking about, if you think that the owner who's an investor and who's renting his place isn't passing that on to the renter, which then makes the rental housing market more expensive. So I'm committed to doing a housing bill this session that will address a lot of the issues that we've talked about today. And I'm also doing another condo bill to address some of these issues that we know we still need to address. It's almost like it's an ongoing, I feel like if I'm fortunate to serve out my 8 years in the Florida House, I will be working on housing for the next 6 years, because it is the number one topic.
Well, there's certainly a lot to do. And so I want to go from the top down. In the luxury housing, in the luxury condo market, if you got the money, life is good. That's the best buildings that you can buy. They're not going to be subject to any of this, to the same legislations for the most part. I mean, they're all subject to the same legislations, but you don't have to worry about it for another 30 years. These are brand new, top of the line, high quality buildings. And again, unless
they're starting and they're able to start out with reserves intact, so
correct.
they're able to.
Unless we're in the buyer beware, unless we're in the buyer beware category of condo hotel, which again is not necessarily to say don't buy that. It just means know what it is that you're buying, and make sure you understand and pay attention to the articles of incorporation and the bylaws and the condominium structure.
Right.
So to those that are looking to buy newer construction or luxury in Miami, much less to worry about. It's really more focused on when you get to that other 75% of the buildings in Miami, which are 30, 35 plus years old. And to those people that are looking for investment or looking to purchase in Miami, would you, what would you have to say to those people?
So I guess if I forewarn everyone, we're in a bit of a kind of a tenuous situation in the condo market, right? I would say to everybody, just make sure you know what's coming down the pike, right? In other words, you know that you would have regular deferred repairs and maintenance. That's if you want to replace the carpets in the hallway, if you want to replace lights, tile.
Aesthetics.
Those are things that you reserve for traditionally, right? So know what those are. Know what your property insurance is. That's a very important component. Know when your milestone inspection is going to be due, right? And what could potentially be the problem. And then know what your CSRS reserves are going to be. I mean, it's 4 things that I would now, as a person who would be buying a condo, I would be asking for those 4 elements, because that's gonna determine whether I can actually afford to live in this condominium. I might be able to afford to buy it, but can I afford to live in it is the next question. And I think that's something that, and I tell my realtors every day, your responsibility is to ensure that a prospective buyer has all the information they need so that they don't get into a building like some did that I just recently heard from at the Palace. A couple years ago, they got into a building and then were hit with a $25,000 assessment, and that they could have known before they bought, and they had to pay for it. So I think just full transparency, full disclosure, and then I always say, give every prospective buyer all the information they need to make an informed decision that works for them.
I love that. And then touching again with our last few minutes on low-income housing, and for those that are living in these situations, they're living in a building like the Cricket Club, and maybe they're trying to sell their unit for $250,000, but they have almost a $200,000 assessment coming up. It's like, what would you say to those people? I'm sure that they're feeling a lot of pressure. They're probably a little upset. Maybe they're thinking there's too much government, but at the same token, nobody wants to stand by and watch another building collapse. What do we have to say to those people?
So I think there are a couple of things. Obviously, Miami-Dade County has offered a $50,000 interest-free loan. The government has. The county commission moved a fund to try to help those who couldn't afford it. So you could borrow $50,000 and it's interest-free, and you don't have to repay it until the unit sells.
Are there income requirements for that? There
are income requirements. You have to be, I think, between 80 and or 60 and 80% AMI. But that's obviously been an important program and wildly successful. I also think that condo boards are going to get real serious about whether the vast majority of people in a building can afford these huge assessments. And I think you're going to see more and more. Hopefully the Biscayne 21 situation gets sorted out for developers to not feel so skittish. But I think that that's going to be a real option that people are going to have to consider. It's one way to get out and get your money, and then try to find another place. I think trying to find another place is going to be challenging. It's going to be
the hardest part in where you go. And, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't want that to happen. And so I do not envy your role or position.
No. Neither do I, but listen, I signed up for this, so I can't complain, and I'm up for the challenge.
On the real estate side of things, I think it's important to note, that if you're not working with a professional who understands these issues, who understands how to protect you, who understands even topically some of these things, maybe reconsider who it is that you're working with, because we always say who you work with matters. And to Vicki, I want to say that it's been a very informative and educational morning. I think we could talk on this topic for days, if not hours, days. I hope that it's been informative to our viewers as well. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And you've always made yourself really available to your constituents and to anybody really that asks. And that this is not our own private access to Vicki Lopez. And so I do want to ask, how would one of our viewers or how do your constituents reach out to your office or to contact you if they have further questions, which I'm sure I have more questions and we're out of time.
Yes.
How can they reach out to you?
The best way to reach out to me is to send me an email. It's Vicki, VICKI .Lopez, LOPZ, at myfloridahouse.gov. Very easy. It's your house. And I'm just here. Yes. And I'm just here holding on to the chair for the time being. So yes, please feel free to reach out. And if you've got ideas, as I'm working on this next housing bill and the condo bills, I am open to, to really entertaining lots and lots of new ideas that people are coming up with, things I may have missed. So yes, please.
Absolutely. And I want to introduce you to some people in the real estate world that, have been doing overseeing brokerage for 20 plus years, that understand ground up new development, have worked in new development sales, and coached and guided these people to understand affordable housing. So I think I'm sure you're speaking to many professionals in the real estate industry, but I'd love to make some of those introductions and make sure that all the voices are being heard.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for having us. And Josh.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
For having me.
Thank you, Josh. And thank you.
Sit down with you. We're going to have to do this again sometime.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Well, there's more legislation coming, and we'll have to do a part 2. So stay tuned for part 2. That wraps us up, guys. Thank you for watching. And we will be back. If you need to reach myself or Josh, that's Joshua at compass.com, or myself, Levi, Levi at compass.com. Thanks for watching, guys.